So welcome again. Here we are. It's Bread and Roses information session on this year's Gender Justice Organizing Fund for folks who are interested in applying for this go round of the fund. What we're going to cover today is a little bit about Bread and Roses in general, how we do our work, what we think, how we define community organizing. We're going to talk about eligibility criteria, both in general for Bread and Roses and specifically for the Gender Justice Organizing Fund. We're going to walk you through some how-tos and how to do your application. And then we're going to talk also about the broader grant making process, what happens after you submit your information to us. If you're unfamiliar with Bread and Roses, or just to remind you, Bread and Roses is Philadelphia's social justice fund, and we support community organizing and movements and their leaders. We organize donors to give and raise money. So we organize folks to both give their own money, but also to raise money from their networks. And Nigel spends a lot of his time doing that work. We move money using democratic community-led grant-making processes. So that means, despite the fact that my title is Director of Grant Making, I don't actually make any of the choices around who gets funded, which is relevant to you all here because it means I can be really helpful to you as you write your applications. I'm not the audience for the application, so there's no conflict of interest to me supporting you through the process. So all of our grant-making decisions are made by groups of community members in a couple of different structures that we use. We're also interested in working with you all to build your capacity. Again, I think relevant to today, one thing I would encourage you to do is be in conversation with us as you write your application. It's a great way for you to build your capacity. And then, yeah, we also work to get folks. I mean, this is harder to do in these pandemic times, but we also work to build relationships across our grantees and also amongst our grantees and our donors. So that is a broad overview of what we're up to here. We have been around for a minute. We were funded in the the early 1970s. Originally, we were the People's Fund, and so originally, we weren't even a 501c3, and every person who donated any money to to the People's Fund also participated in deciding where the money was going to go. So from the get-go, we've been interested in, having understanding from the folks on the ground where the money needs to move to support movements. So we come by our practices with lots of experience, lots of history. So I'm going to leave the Bread and Roses general information. I can pause there and say, does anyone have any questions about just Bread and Roses overall? Okay, if they come up later, feel free to ask them. We're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about our specific requirements and eligibility criteria for Gender Justice Organizing Fund grantees. We want grantees to have a long-term vision about what gender justice looks like and to be working on strategies and activities that get us from where we are now to your long-term vision. We want Gender Justice Organizing Fund grantees to be led by folks most affected by gender oppression. We also want grantees to have a broad base. So we want you to be building community, bringing people in. We want to understand that you are working on building a broad leadership set, right? So that if one leader moves on from the work can still continue to be successful. We want gender justice organizing grantees who have a power analysis, who know how identity and relates to power, who can talk about how power shows up in your work, both within your own organizations and within your own organizations, within the broader gender justice organizing community, like inter-organizationally, and also within the work you're trying to do. What power are you shifting? We want Gender Justice Organizing Fund grantees who are, again, working on, you have an existing membership base and that you're working on bringing more folks in to your membership base by, spreading the word about your work, being relational. There are a couple of other requirements for gender justice organizing fund grantees. We talked about having that long-term vision and having your strategies and activities being working toward your long-term vision. We want you to have a plan that outlines what your activities are that are moving you along toward that vision of justice. We want you to be you don't need to be working in coalition, but we want you to understand if there are folks who are doing similar work to you in the Philadelphia region, so that we're not, so that we're working, smarter together, not harder separately. And then one other criteria that we'll look at is we want to understand how the work you're doing does or does not appeal to other more traditional funders who are more traditional than Bread and Roses. And I want to bring this point up. I'll bring it up now. I'll talk about it again when we talk about budget, but I think it's helpful for you all to talk about which portions of your budget, particularly if you have a larger budget, what portions of your budget are available to fund your organizing work. Just want to be clear how critical or not critical the funding from the Bread and Roses Gender Justice Organizing Fund would be to that work that we just talked about, the work toward that just vision and the work of shifting power. So those are our broad Gender Justice Organizing Fund criteria. I think that's the end of those two slides, right, Lucas? I'll pause here and yeah, I'm going to pause there and see if you've got questions about the specific fund criteria before we go into our definition of community organizing. Okay, great. So at Bread and Roses, we're funding community organizing, and always want to make sure that people know what we mean when we're saying that. I think, organizations and people can have different definitions, and so I wanted to share Bread and Roses' definition. So here at Bread and Roses, we define community organizing as community-led collective action, right? That gets back to the base we talked about in those previous two slides. So you're working with a base, community-led, collectively, and you're working to shift balance of power between, community members and policymakers, folks who hold power and folks who don't hold power. And you're also in that community-led action, collective action, working to make changes in policies or practices at the institutional or systems level. And that really means like you're working to make changes that will make changes for a broad swath of, Vicki, let me know if that didn't work. I said yes to your request. A broad swath of people. So, the changes that we're trying to make are changes that are systemic, that are going to help everyone who participates in these systems. No problem. You're welcome, Vicki. Great. So I'll give you a couple of examples of things that we consider community organizing. Putting together protests, mass protests, civil disobedience, mobilizing folks, getting people together to voice a common concern, mobilizing people to express those concerns to public officials and pressure them to meet those concerns. Organizing is also getting people together and figuring out what those concerns are. It's training your base and it's training your base to show up in systems differently, disrupt systems that are harmful. Organizing can also be building an alternative to systems that you, in your analysis, are not those gender just systems we're aiming for. And community organizing, again, I think similar to what we said about hosting town halls and training your folks, it's like community organizing can also be, working with your base to make them more effective organizers and to make them understand our current baseline systems and the systems that we're working toward. I will pause again there and see. So that's, that's all information to help you. That's all information to help you understand what folks are looking for in your applications, right? So can you talk? And in case you don't know, all of Bread and Roses' grants are general operating grants, right? So you'll receive the money, it supports your general operations. And one piece of advice I like to give to applicants is speak about the parts of your work that fit in with those things that I just spoke about in your application, right? We love lots of work that is not the work I just talked about, but the work that's going to get you funding from this fund is the work that is the subset of your work that fits into those criteria that I just spoke about. So spend your time and energy talking about those pieces of your work in this particular application. With that context, any questions before I pass it to Nigel to talk to you a little bit about who will be reading your applications? Okay, cool. So we're running this, every year we run the Gender Justice Organizing Fund as a giving project, and that means that there's a particular way that we're running the community grant making, decision making process, which comes out of Nigel's team. So I'll pass to him for his explanation about how it works.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sarah. So the Giving Project has been with us since 2016. It's been a really great mechanism to bring in community members and have them really grow through this process and also be the decision makers. And as Sarah mentioned, that's why Sarah can be such a great resource to you all, because as an organization, we don't make the decisions, our local community does. So the Giving Project really brings together a pretty diverse group of people. We intentionally make sure that it's cross-class, multiracial, intergenerational, gender diverse. They just finished recruiting this group of people, and they'll actually be meeting as a full group starting this Saturday to begin this process of really sharing and learning what each other's vision for social justice is. And they're going to also be building some skills over 6 months so that they can read all the applications that you all submit. They're also going to be doing some fundraising in that process. Bread and Roses, we run 4 giving projects every year. Each one of those is linked to a different fund. So if, as I'm talking about the Giving Project, you have any interest in hearing more or possibly want to participate in one, feel free to get in contact with me, and I can provide you with even more details about what that 6-month program looks like. I think there's one more slide. So why would you want to join a giving project? Spend 6 months of your time with Bread and Roses and a group of possibly 19 other people that you don't know. Well, one of the biggest things in there is that we're going to provide you fundraising training, right? So the dollars that are actually going to ultimately be granted out come from this particular group fundraising efforts. So we support them in gaining and using those skills throughout the 6-month process so that those grants can be made. It's also a great opportunity to improve grant writing. For those who have been involved in grant writing before, one of the best ways to improve your grant writing is to be able to look at other people's grants, right? You're going to gain some ideas. You're going to really see how people are able to convey their ideas in creative ways. And you're free to be able to take on those creative approaches and incorporate those into your own grant writing. I think spending 6 months of time with a group of people who is pretty diverse, but also has a shared vision for social justice allows for a lot of space to build meaningful relationships. These relationships, they extend way beyond the duration of that 6-month process. We have people from our first Giving Project, which happened in 2016, who still regularly connect with each other. And some of these relationships are beyond just like the friendship ones, which are really important. But some of them have become like working relationships. Some of them have become ways that people have bolstered and supported their own organizing efforts throughout in the Philadelphia region. I think one of my favorite parts about the Giving Project is that everything is really grounded in deep discussions about race and class, and doing this in a space that we don't always get to do it in. So when we're talking about fundraising, when we're talking about grant writing and reading grant applications, we're doing that from a lens that understands that racism and classism are real things and that we're all impacted by them. There are lessons and not always good lessons that we've learned about those. So we get to discuss those, unpack them, and then also think of solutions to approach those things differently. And the last part about why you should want to join the Giving Project is because ultimately we are moving money to critical movements for change, right? And this fund, particularly the Gender Justice Organizing Fund, we're going to be getting dollars to organizations who are doing really impactful work in a really important time. So if any of those things stand out to you as something that you would want to be more engaged with and build some skills around, feel free to get in contact with me or any one of us, and we can provide you more details about the Giving Project. Any questions about the Giving Project right there? I'm following Sarah's good example of pausing for questions.
What is the best way to get a hold of you if we wanted to talk more about it?
I will put my email right into the chat. You can also call our office. Either one of those works.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Appreciate that. True confessions. My first relationship with Bread and Roses started when one of my friends was in a Giving Project and I got asked to donate, and then I also participated in a Giving Project. And now one of my coworkers is one of my former Giving Project cohort mates. So yeah, just to reiterate to Nigel that the relationship building piece is really lovely. So let me see it. Oh, great, Nigel. And Nigel did put his email in the chat there. Let us quickly talk about some additional eligibility criteria. Sorry. So Bread and Roses, we have some umbrella eligibility criteria that go across funds. So we talked about the specific gender justice organizing criteria, and these are criteria for any funding that you might apply for at Bread and Roses that we're talking about now. So again, just to reiterate, we're looking to fund organizations that have long-term visions for social change toward justice, and that are working on strategies moving us and their work toward that long-term vision. For this fund, this is the verbiage that we have around what the priorities of the fund are. So the Gender Justice Organizing Fund prioritizes work toward a world in which all people, especially women, girls, trans, gender nonconforming, and LGBTQI+ people, are able to identify and express their genders and sexual orientations without negative consequences, and that all of those folks who are experiencing gender oppression can have economic, social, and political power and the resources to create thriving, safe, and just communities. So that's the topic area that this fund is looking to support. That's sort of our wording around what we think of as a gender just world and society. Folks, to get funding from Bread and Roses, organizations have to be located in Philadelphia and the collar counties. So that's Philadelphia, Bucks, Chester, Delaware, Montgomery, or Camden counties. You either need to be a 501c3 nonprofit organization, or you can also have a fiscal sponsor, someone who's willing to, is a 501c3 and is willing to receive your money and help you manage it. Or a third option is that you could also have a pending 501c3 application with the IRS and just show us the documentation of that application. So those are the three ways that you can show us that that you're going to spend the money, you're going to certify you spend the money for charitable purposes. If you are a current or previous grantee of ours, we need you to be up to date with all of your grant reports that are due before we can consider you for this Gender Justice Organizing Fund grant. Your application must be complete. We'll talk through in a little more detail what a complete application is. And just a reminder that go revisit that Bread and Roses definition of community organizing, because you have to be using community organizing in the way that we've defined it to be eligible for funding in the fund. Yeah, we've talked through this already, this slide. So we'll just be clear with you explicitly about some things that we do not fund. And again, you can be doing some of this work as long as you are also doing the organizing work, but I would encourage you, if you are doing work that we do not fund, don't spend your time in our application telling us about it. You can include a sentence, to acknowledge you're doing it, but don't focus on it. So work that we don't fund is direct service or social services. We don't fund self-help or empowerment. We don't fund education or advocacy. We don't fund research or schools. We don't fund if you're building something, right? So if you're building a building or you're raising capital for some sort of capital investment, we don't fund that. And we don't fund individuals or scholarships or fellowships, with one exception of a fund that is a Black Scholarship Fund for gay men, which will open in the fall if you're interested. So again, if you're doing that work, it doesn't disqualify you, but don't speak about that work in your application, speak about the community organizing work. So we're going to switch gears from talking about eligibility and talk about how to prepare your application. So again, I'll pause and see if folks have eligibility questions. Cool. Okay, so to prepare your application, my sister is a nurse, and throughout nursing school, I'd help her study. And in all of the exams, like step one for all nursing tasks is gather supplies. So I always think of that when I look at this slide. So step one for preparing your application is gather your supplies, like a good nurse. And so here are the things that you will need to gather. If your organization has been around for at least a year, gather your previous year's gather your previous fiscal year's financial statements. So that is, gather the information about where your income came from in your previous year and what you spent it on. Gather your current or proposed budget for this year. So that is, gather the information on where you're planning on all your income coming from for this year and where you're planning on spending it in expenses. Gather your IRS 501c3 tax exempt status letter or proof of your pending application. Or if you're fiscally sponsored, you need two things. You need your fiscal sponsor's 501c3 letter and a letter from your fiscal sponsor saying that they are committed to serving that role for you. Okay, so once you've gathered your supplies, come to our website, the Bread and Roses website, go to the Gender Justice Organizing Fund page and click on the Apply button. This will take you to Submittable, which is the software that we use to gather your application information from you. If you haven't created an account yet, you will need to create one. That website is submittable.help to create your account. What I recommend doing is scrolling through the whole application and just taking a look at it before you even think about filling anything in. You can save your draft now in Submittable, but I recommend working on your answers outside of Submittable if that's easier for you. That's an option. We have word counts there. You can say as little as you need to say to answer the questions. The word counts are not requirements. You're not required to give us 500 words. If it says 500 words, it's just saying, please don't use more than 500 words. And honestly, if you have something that's already written that answers the question that's longer than the word count, you can be in touch with us and we can figure out how to, we're trying to make the application as easy as possible. So say what you need to say, don't say more. And if you have something written from something else, feel free to use it. I see Jose's question in the chat, which says, do we have to be a former grantee to apply? The answer is no, you're definitely welcome to apply if you have not received funding before. I highly recommend to do your application far enough in advance that you can have someone else look over your answers. Even in my team, we're always saying like, 2 sets of eyes on everything. It's just, we're all human, and it's easier. It's better to have someone have your back to, make sure A, what you're attempting to communicate is coming across to another person, and B, just to catch any small mistakes that you might have made but not seen yourself. And this is important. Have everything loaded into Submittable and be ready to press the submit button before 11:59 on the deadline date, which is August 17th. Because this is an automated system in Submittable, the submit button disappears like Cinderella at midnight, and you will not be able to hit submit. And we do not accept late applications. It just is too much work on, with the volume of applications we get, managing, even a half dozen folks attempting to work around the deadline is just, it's not fair to everyone who did their work on time for us to be letting folks submit after the deadline. So please do be prepared. It is really, the button will go away at midnight. And so, yeah, please submit before then. Great. So this is, if you have not yet made a Submittable account, this is what it will look like when you go to create one. It's a pretty straightforward web software. Hopefully looks pretty reasonable to you. You'll create your account. On the next slide, I just want to show you where you'll see, oh, Lucas, do you have something to say?
Yeah, just making sure that people use, if you're a first time applying to Bread and Roses, try and use a email account that's either like tied to your org or one that you have access to throughout the year, because you might get an email to that email that you list here about the grant. So it's a good chance to have it tied to like not your personal email, but to a work email account.
Thank you. Good point. And I think the other thing is, if you have applied before, if you're with an organization that you know has applied before, but you haven't been the person who has used the Submittable account, it might be worth reaching out to other people around your organization to figure out how to sign into your existing account, because you could do some copying and pasting from old applications. Okay, we just want to let you see when there is a word count limit, you'll see it in that light gray underneath the box where the answer, where we're asking you to write the answer. So just wanted to orient you to that, make sure you see those. There are 3 tables that we're asking you to fill out in the application. One is your previous fiscal year financial statement, and one is your current year budget. They look exactly the same, but one is for information from last year and one is for your plan for this year. And again, in simple terms, last year's financial statement is just you telling us where your money came from last year and what you spent it on. And this year's budget is simply your plan for where your money is going to come from for this year and what you plan to spend it on. There are some pre-filled out categories for your income and expenses. There are also 3 rows at the bottom that are blank where you can write in additional categories and numbers. So we ask you to, if you don't have any salaries, benefits, or taxes, we ask you to put a 0 in there just so we know that you looked and thought about it and you don't have any of those costs. And same thing with the income. If you're not receiving government grants, I think is one of the lines, you put a 0 in there for us, please. Great. So like I said, those two tables for your last year's financial statement and your current budget look the same, but one is for what happened last year and one is for your plan for this year. We are also asking you to fill out an organizational demographic form. And so this is part of, we gather this information so that we can pass it along to our community grant making committees, and it helps them to understand who it is that is participating in your organization, and also who's leading it, right? So there are 4 columns here. So 4 types of people we're asking you about. We're asking you about staff members, and you may not have any, and that's fine. You can put 0. We're asking you about board members, We're asking you about other leadership. So that's folks who are, your lead organizer, or, who have decision-making power, hold power in your organization, but are not staff or board members. And then we're asking about active members, and that's basically your base, right? The folks who show up to your, if you're doing demonstrations, the folks who show up to your demonstrations, the folks who donate money if you're fundraising, the folks who are on your Facebook page, right? Who are you organizing? Who's your base? And we're asking you to tell us as much as you know about folks' race, immigration status, current class position, gender, trans identity, sexual orientation, ability, and age. And if you don't have the information, you can put zeros in for anything that you don't know. Just to explain the table, you'll see here in the slide, this first row at the top is where you put total number. So if you have 10 staff, you put 10 staff there. If you've got 3 board members, you put 3 board members. That's the number of people. And then for the rest of the chart, it's all percentages. So if you've got 10 staff and 2 of them are, Asian, South Asian, 2 of them are Latino, Latinx, 2 of them are multiracial, you'd put, you'd put 20% in each of those categories, because 20% is 2 is 20% of 10. So that way your percentages should add up to be 100 in each of those columns. So that's the why we're gathering that information and how the table works. Again, if you have any questions as you're actually filling it out, please feel free to reach out to us. We can help you with it. And this is, again, helping our community grant making committee folks, our giving project members, to understand, who's participating in and leading your organization. So that is, I'll pause, and that's all about filling in your information. And then after we make sure y'all are good on that, we'll talk a little bit about what we do with your information after we have it. Okay, I see no hands and hear no questions, so we will forge ahead. So after you click submit at 11:59 p.m. or earlier on August 17th, we will, all of the applications come first to staff, and what we do as staff is we just make sure you meet all of the basic eligibility requirements. So, did you submit a complete application? Are you a 501c3? Do you work in the, the Philadelphia region? And so we are only screening out folks who don't meet the basic eligibility at that stage. And if you do get screened out at that stage, we will send you an email and let you know that you got screened out and which eligibility criteria the screening triggered the screening out. After we screen, we pass all of the applications that meet the eligibility criteria on to the Giving Project, and there is an interview phase. So Giving Project members will be in groups of three to 4, and we'll invite you. You'll hear from my team to invite you to schedule an interview with the Giving Project members, and those are all happening virtually for this fund. Is that right, Nigel? Yeah. So interviews will be Zoom interviews, and we'll invite you to bring leadership and membership of your organization. I encourage you to bring, a group of folks to the interview, and I encourage you to bring a group of folks that are representative of some of those categories we talked about in the org demographic chart, right? So I would bring some staff if you have staff. I would definitely bring some people who are part of your base. I would bring active members. The Giving Project folks will be curious to hear from folks from all parts of your organization. So they'll ask questions. The Giving Project members will ask you questions. They'll have read your application. So they might have some specific questions. And then the Giving Project members as a group will decide, based on how much they've fundraised and how much money they have to give away in grants, they will decide amongst themselves which of the applications they are going to recommend to fund. And then They recommend to our Bread and Roses Board of Directors which groups to fund, and the Board of Directors gives final approval. So for this gender justice giving project, I'm going to tell you which board they're going to, but it's going to take me one moment. Do you know off the top of your head, Lucas, which board the gender justice?
Yeah, I think it's the next slide or one of the next slides.
Oh, beautiful. Great.
Well, here's the board.
These are the wonderful humans who
Lovely
will
board.
ultimately approve the giving project's recommendations. Oh yeah, and then we have a little bit of a schedule here, right? So just a reminder, is how many times can I say it? Application deadline is August 17th. Don't forget to submit before 11:59 that day. Interviews will be happening over the months of October and November for this fund. Our giving project members will be making decisions over October and November, and the decisions will go, their recommendations will go to our board's December meeting. So the board meets at the beginning of December, and we will then notify applicants of the board and giving project decisions during the month of December. Just a reminder that this is one fund of a handful of funds that we're running. So Gender Justice Organizing Fund, right now, these are $10,000 grants that you're applying to in this fund. We also have a Phoebus Criminal Justice Initiative. That application will go out in the fall. Those grants tend to be a little bit smaller, in the $2,000 to $6,000 range. We are going to run a Media Justice Fund. That's also going to open this fall. We're in the process of designing that fund, and so the grant amount is to be TBD there still. I mentioned earlier that we will open our Jonathan Lack Scholarship for Gay Men also in the fall. Those are scholarships to folks who are either from the Philadelphia region or going to school in the Philadelphia region, and they're $5,000 to $10,000 scholarships. And then next spring, we will run again 2 of our other core funds, our Racial and Economic Justice Fund, which awards $10,000 grants, and our Future Fund, which is for more nascent and emergent organizing, and that fund awards $5,000 grants. So I think that is all of the news that is fit to print. Like I said, I really do encourage you all to reach out to us as you're applying. We are always happy to help you think through what parts of your work to focus on. We're always happy to walk you through the logistics of how to get us the information that we're asking you for. If you email us at grants@breadrosesfund.org, it will come to the whole team, and we'll be able to find the right person to respond to you. And I will pause now and see if folks have questions. Great, love it. Again, not your last chance to ask questions. I should also say, we didn't put this on a slide, but we are on August 9th, Tuesday, August 9th at 10 a.m. We're hosting another hour-long Zoom, which is just our offer to be on Zoom and let you all come and ask specific questions you have as you're working on your application. So just some application assistance time that's pre-scheduled. So that's Tuesday, August 9th at 10 a.m. And the link to register for that Zoom is on our website right near where the link to register for this Zoom was. So if, as you are getting started with the information we provided you today, if you have specific questions, you're always welcome to come to that session and ask them. You're welcome to come to that session and listen to other people's questions, even if you haven't started yours yet, because those questions might be ones that will help you in the long run too. Okay, y'all. Well, appreciate you spending the time with us. Hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that sets you up for success in your application process. We will also, if you know folks who are going to apply who aren't here, or if you are like, oh, what is that thing that they said in the session? We recorded it and we'll post a link to the recording also on the Gender Justice Organizing Fund page of our website too. So you can always come back and re-reference it.